On the split infinitive world of English Grammar Program 3, we'll start off by explaining verbals, which are verb forms that function as some other type of speech in a sentence. Next, we'll introduce you to 4 parts of speech: adverbs, which describe verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs; prepositions, which show relationships between other words; conjunctions, which provide transitions within sentences; and interjections, which are words that express emotion or surprise.
Pop quiz time! What is the function of an adverb? Hang around and we'll tell you the answer at the end of the program.
You can get it. All right.
Let's start off our program with a big review about nouns, pronouns, adjectives, and verbs. After that, we'll tackle verbals, adverbs, prepositions, conjunctions, and interjections. Now, here's the review.
First, nouns. A noun can be a person, place, thing, concept, or idea. There are 4 types of nouns: common nouns like gecko, desk, and pencil; proper nouns like Mrs. Kowalski, Washington, D.C., and Abraham Lincoln; compound nouns like bicycle trail, 32, and classroom; and collective nouns like family, team, and audience.
Pronouns. A pronoun is a word that takes the place of a noun. It refers to the noun. We learned about the personal pronouns, I, you, he, she, it, we, and they. The possessive pronouns, my, your, his, her, our, and their, and the demonstrative pronouns, this, that, these, and those.
So, what have we learned about adjectives? We know adjectives add zip and zing to our hard-working nouns and pronouns. Adjectives describe nouns and pronouns. Articles are tiny adjectives like a, an, and the. And finally, we can use our demonstrative pronouns, this, that, these, and those.
Okay, we've learned a lot about verbs. First, we learned that a verb expresses action or describes a state of being. A verb changes form to reflect who's using the verb: I, you, he, she, we, or they, what the noun's number is, be it singular or plural, and what tense is being used.
We learned several different tenses. The first were the simple tenses, the past, present, and future. They express what happened, what is happening, and what will happen.
The next tenses we learned were the perfect tenses: the past perfect, the present perfect, and the future perfect. These tenses express an action that has a beginning and an end. They're formed by combining the present tense of the helping verb to have and the perfect form of the verb.
Next, we learned about the progressive tenses: the past progressive, the present progressive, and the future progressive. These guys indicate continuing action. The progressive tenses are formed by adding ing to the end of the main verb and using the proper form of the helping verb to be.
The last set was the perfect progressive tenses: the past perfect progressive, the present perfect progressive, and the future perfect progressive. These tenses combine the features of both the perfect and the progressive tenses. That means the perfect progressive tenses are formed by adding ing to the end of the main verb and using the correct forms of both of the helping verbs to have and to be.
And don't forget conditional statements. A conditional statement is used to express uncertainty or speculation. It's often used with the word if. And don't forget to use the correct form of to be. Were, not was. That's the verbs, folks.
Section C, verbals.
So we hope you now have a handle on how verbs work in sentences and the many ways they can be changed to show a different tense. But no matter what, a verb is a verb is a verb, right? Well, actually, no.
One funky thing about verbs is you can change them into other parts of speech.
We know that it's part of a verb's nature to show action or a state of being, but with a little tweaking, we can take that spirit of action and shape it into a noun or an adjective. When we do this to a verb, we get what is called a verbal. A verbal is a verb form that functions like another part of speech in a sentence. There are three main types: gerunds, infinitives, and participles.
The gerund.
When we add ing to a verb and use it as a noun, we call it a gerund. Gerunds let us use verbs as if they were nouns. Remember that a noun is a person, place, thing, or concept. Now, take a look at this sentence.
Chirping is an important skill for crickets. Now, let's figure out which words in the sentence are verbs. Well, we know is a verb, and chirping looks like a verb too. But if you look at the role it's playing in the sentence, it's actually functioning more like a noun, like it's the concept of chirping, not the action of chirping. No cricket is actually chirping in the sentence. Instead, we're talking about chirping as a skill, which makes it a noun.
Notice how all we had to do was add ing to the end of the word to make it a gerund, changing chirp into chirping.
The infinitive.
Another form of the verb we can use as a noun or adjective is the infinitive. The infinitive form of a verb is the one that has the word to in front of it. To live, to learn, to coagulate, to be, or not to be. Infinitives one and all.
Suppose we were to write, to succeed in creating the perfect tuna casserole takes lots and lots of practice. Our verb in this case is takes. To succeed is actually a noun in this sentence because we're talking about the concept of succeeding. Now, let's use an infinitive phrase as an adjective.
My great-aunt Matilda has a license to kill. Here we have an infinitive phrase, to kill, modifying the word license. What kind of license is it? A license to kill. Now let's just say you have a license to change the form of your verb to an infinitive. Use it with caution.
Present participles and past participles.
We can also change verbs into adjectives by either adding ing to the end or using the perfect form of a verb, which usually means adding either ed or en. Remember that an adjective is a word that describes a noun or a pronoun. When we form one of these, we call it a participle. The ing form is called a present participle, and the perfect form is called a past participle.
So we can take the verb fly and add ing, which gives us flying. Now we have the makings for a present participle, and we can use it in a sentence like, the flying monkeys are actually quite friendly. Notice how the word flying in this sentence is being used to describe the noun monkeys. This would make it an adjective, not a verb. Hey, looks like we have a prime example of a present participle.
To make a past participle, we use the perfect form of the verb, which usually means adding an ed, unless we're dealing with an irregular verb, when we would usually add something like en or something else weird.
Now, let's try to make a past participle using the verb exhaust. Since it's a regular verb, we can just add the ed ending, which gives us exhausted, and we're ready to use it in a sentence.
The exhausted clown passed out at the end of his performance, but nobody helped him because they thought he was kidding. Here, exhausted is an adjective describing the word clown, which makes it a past participle.
If you're trying to make a past participle using an irregular verb, just use whatever ending you would use for the perfect tense. Take the word fall. We know you wouldn't say falled, so we would use the perfect form fallen. Now we could say, my dog loves to go for walks on newly fallen snow. Again, we've made a past participle out of the word fall since we're using fallen to describe snow. Are you getting the hang of it yet?
Even though we just got down and dirty talking about participles, you probably use participles a lot more than you realize. The downside is, the more we tend to use a construction like this, the more ways there are for us to screw it up. Here are a couple things to look out for when you use participles.
Remember that a participle is a verb that we tinker with and then use like an adjective, and an adjective modifies a noun. Sometimes, however, when we're really into our writing, we may leave out the noun but keep the participle in there. Suppose we say,
Hoping for a miracle, the townspeople prayed that the emu crop would be bountiful this year. Everything's okay so far. In this sentence, hoping is a present participle describing the noun, the townspeople. Now, suppose you weren't paying too much attention and wrote, Hoping for a miracle, the emu crop would be bountiful this year. Aha! We know hoping is a participle, but what exactly is it describing? We know the emus certainly aren't looking forward to the harvest. We've used a participle, but left out the noun it's supposed to be modifying. This type of mistake is called a dangling participle, and it's a pet peeve of many teachers, so always be on the lookout and never leave your participle dangling. It's also embarrassing.
Another common mistake is to leave the D off a past participle. What if we say,
Hakeem was supposed to know how to operate the Zamboni. We're really using the verb suppose to describe Hakeem, which would make it a participle. But we know that to make a past participle, we need to use the perfect form of the word, which here would be supposed. So, the correct way to say this sentence would be, Hakeem was supposed to know how to operate the Zamboni.
In this last section, we talked about how you can twist and turn around a verb and make it into something else like a noun or an adjective. We call these new words verbals. There are three main types of verbals: gerunds, infinitives, and participles.
Gerunds are the first type of verbal. Gerunds are when we slap an ing onto the end of a verb and use it as a noun. For instance, in the sentence, skiing is my favorite sport. Skiing is a gerund.
Infinitives are the second type of verbal. Infinitives are when we put the word to in front of a verb and use the whole thing as a noun or an adjective. In the sentence, to learn a foreign language is my next goal, to learn is an infinitive used as a noun. In the sentence, I have a license to drive is an infinitive used as an adjective.
Participles are the third type of verbal. There are present participles and past participles. A present participle is when you add ing to a verb and use it as an adjective. In the phrase, flying monkeys, flying is a present participle. A past participle is when you take the perfect form of a verb and use it as an adjective. In the phrase, the exhausted clown, exhausted is a past participle.
Part 4, the best of the rest. Adverbs, prepositions, conjunctions, and interjections.
Great! Now we know quite a bit about how verbs work, so we can use verbs
Carefully.
wisely,
energetically,
Like totally!
Hey, what did you do with my verbs?
Section A, adverbs.
We already know we can use adjectives to describe nouns and pronouns. But guess what? We can use words to describe verbs too. We call these verb-enhancing words adverbs. So, adverbs describe verbs, but they can also describe adjectives and other adverbs. We'll show you how they work. If the word answers the question how often, when, or to what extent, you're probably dealing with an adverb.
The easiest way to see if you're dealing with an adverb is to see if the word answers the question how often, when, or to what extent. And the easiest way to build yourself an adverb is to add an ly to the end of an adjective.
Here's an example. As a talker, Simon might be slow, but we would say he talks slowly. See how first slow describes Simon, which makes it an adjective, while slowly answers the question, how does Simon talk, which makes it an adverb. All we had to do to change slow into an adverb was add an ly.
We can also write, the color of these mushrooms is slightly different. Here we have formed the adverb slightly by adding an ly to the word slight. Then we use it to describe the adjective different. Now, let's use an adverb to modify another adverb.
Suppose we write, this mushroom is very definitely poisonous. Now we have an adjective poisonous modified by an adverb definitely. But notice how we also have the word very, which is describing definitely. This makes very an adverb since it's being used to describe another adverb.
But wait, it doesn't end with an ly. Did you notice that very is being used as an adverb even though it doesn't end in ly? Yep, you guessed it, it's an exception.
This ly thing works for about 99.44% of adverbs. Some other stinkers like good and fast are exceptions, which isn't too scary since we know fastly and goodly aren't words.
When to use the word good in a sentence and when to use well can be a little tricky sometimes. Your best bet is to remember that if you're asking the question how, you're dealing with an adverb and should use well. Let's take a look at a couple of examples.
Suppose we say, Candace can play the accordion very well. We use the adverb form well because we're describing how Candace can play, and play is a verb.
Now, let's say Candace's playing is good. Here we can see that good is describing the word playing, which might look like a verb at first, but upon closer examination, we see that it is, in fact, a gerund.
Remember, a gerund is a verbal in ing form that is used as a noun in a sentence. So since we're describing a gerund, which we know is technically a noun, we use the adjective good. Adverbs are words that can describe verbs, adjectives, and even other adverbs. Adverbs usually answer one of the following questions: how often, when, or to what extent. Adverbs often travel with an ly attached to the end of them.
Good, very good. Now let's leave adverbs and move on to our next part of speech, the prepositions.
In.
Out.
Over.
Under.
Around!
Yeah, section B, prepositions.
Prepositions are words that show relationships between other words, usually nouns. We use them to show how words relate in terms of time and space. Across, by, at, and through are some of my favorite prepositions.
Whenever you see a preposition in a sentence, you're probably going to see a noun not so far behind it. You might say, among the turkeys, past the pancake house, or with Pedro. The preposition plus the noun that comes after it is called the prepositional phrase. But don't worry about that now. We'll go into more detail about that a little later. Let's look at a preposition in a sentence.
Darla will find her missing watch somewhere among the turkeys. Our preposition here is among, and we can see that it's showing a spatial relationship between the two nouns, watch and turkey. The watch could be under the turkeys, between the turkeys, or heaven help us, inside a turkey. But because we use the preposition among, we know exactly where Darla needs to look to find her missing watch. Where? Among the turkeys.
That sentence demonstrated how a preposition can show how words relate in terms of space. Now let's see one that shows how two words relate in terms of time.
Mildred always finishes her meatloaf before Mark. In this sentence, before is functioning as a preposition because it's showing a time relationship between Mildred and Mark. Or then when it comes to eating their meatloaf, Mildred is before Mark, not after, during, or past him. Prepositions all.
Sometimes prepositions can form close and intimate relationships with verbs, so much so that when they're together, they can surrender their individual meanings and become their own concept. Here's an example, using the prepositions at, over, and up, and the verb looked.
The chef looked at the secret recipe. Simple enough. We have a chef looking at a recipe. But suppose we say the chef looked over the secret recipe. Now we have a chef quickly reading the recipe. Now let's say we have the chef looked up the secret recipe. Now the chef has the recipe filed somewhere and she's trying to find it.
See how looked over and looked up means something completely different from looked at? And at no point was anyone actually looking up at the sky or over top the piece of paper on which the recipe was written. The prepositions over and up have fused with the verb to change it into a completely different idea. When a preposition is used to alter the meaning of a verb, that's amore.
So, a preposition is a word that is used to show a relationship between two other words in a sentence, and this relationship could be either in time or space. We've also learned that in some special cases, a preposition can be used in close connection with a verb to alter its meaning. So, before, after, under, and over are prepositions.
And. But.
Or
Now!
Then. Section C, conjunctions.
Conjunctions are words that provide transitions between sentences and parts of sentences. Some examples of conjunctions are and, but, or, and therefore. Sometimes an entire phrase of words can serve as a conjunction. On the other hand, and in addition, are great examples.
The really great thing about conjunctions is that not only can they hook two things together, they also show how these two things relate. Conjunctions. They're small, but they pack a lot of power.
For example, and often shows a state of equality between the two things it's linking together, while but is usually used to show a definite contrast. And still others, like therefore and thus, show cause and effect. Let's look at a couple of sentences to see how this works.
Suppose we say, Frog and Toad are my friends. In this sentence, the word and sets up a state of equality between Frog and Toad. Now, if we change and to or, we get Frog or Toad is my friend. That gives us something completely different. Now, instead of having two amphibian friends, I only have one or the other. Poor me. Behold the power of conjunctions.
Also, some conjunctions come in pairs, like either or, neither nor, both and not only but also. Let's look at one of those in a sentence. Actually, quite a famous saying.
Neither a borrower nor a lender be. I disappear.
Here the conjunctions neither and nor are a package deal. If you use one, you gotta use the other.
Those are the conjunctions. Remember that conjunctions are not only words or phrases that hook parts of a sentence together, but they also show how these different parts relate to each other. Sometimes conjunctions come in pairs, so we have to use them both.
So, those are all the parts of speech. There are nouns, pronouns, Hey, wait a minute!
Section D, interjections.
Oh yeah, there's one more part of speech we need to talk about. The interjection. Interjections are words or short phrases that don't play any other grammatical role in the sentence other than to express emotion or surprise.
Great! Wow!
Hooray!
As you can see, interjections are fun. And they're grammatically acceptable in SEAE. What a bonus.
Bonus!
But interjections can be a bit annoying too.
Wow, look! Oranges! Yummy, juicy, delicious! Yikes.
See, they also tend to lose their effectiveness when overused, so use them sparingly. And in formal writing, try to avoid them.
If you do ever want to use an interjection in a sentence, try to use it in the beginning, which makes sense because what you're probably going to be using it for is to get the attention of your reader. Then, after you have them hooked, you can continue with the rest of your sentence. Here's an example.
Wow, that's a big wheel of cheese. Notice how we stuck a comma in between our interjection wow and the rest of the sentence. We also ended the sentence with an exclamation point instead of a period. We could have used a period instead, but as you've probably already figured out, the interjection and the exclamation point are best buds and rarely travel alone.
Okay, we learned all about adverbs, prepositions, conjunctions, and interjections.
Adverbs are words that can describe verbs, adjectives, and even other adverbs. Adverbs usually answer one of the following questions: how often, when, or to what extent. Adverbs often travel with an ly attached to the end of them.
Prepositions are all about the time-space continuum. Prepositions usually show how words relate in terms of time or space. In, out, over, around, on top of, and through are all examples of prepositions.
Conjunctions are words or phrases that hook together phrases, providing transitions. Conjunctions can also show how other phrases relate to each other. Ever popular conjunctions are and, but, and or. Some conjunctions always travel in pairs, like either or neither nor.
Interjections are words or short phrases that express emotion or surprise. Wow, or yeah, aw, and eek are all great interjections.
Okay, now that we've talked about the parts of speech and the roles that each of them play, it's time to put the pieces together and see what we get.
Great grammar quote! Nostalgia is like a grammar lesson. You find the present tense and the past perfect. What is the function of an adverb? An adverb modifies or describes a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. To order this or any other Standard Deviant School program on video cassette, call 1-800-238-9669.
This is PBS.
For more information on Standard Deviant School products, go to standarddeviants.org.